COSATU has commended government's decision to extend the contracts for community work program workers. The union says the reprieve will provide much-needed comfort for the vulnerable workers and their families. Over 67,000 CWP workers aged 55 years and older would have been out of a job come the end of January. For more insight on this, we're joined now by Matthew Parks, COSATU's parliamentary coordinator. Matthew, good to have you. Thank you very much for your time. It's short-lived reprieve. If you look at it, this CWP program is destined to be, at least in its current form, discontinued in one way or the other. Are there no permanent interventions really that could be a replacement for this?
Good afternoon. Thanks for having us. Look, it gives us breathing space. The number one crisis, the urgent crisis, will to assist to find a plan for these 67,000 community works program workers. We've managed to do that. So there's money to pay them for January, for February, for March. That takes us to the end of the government financial year. But at the same time, government does recognize when in our meetings with the ministers for COGTA, for finance, that there is a need for a solution beyond that. So not just simply 3 months and then off you go. No, there's space for these 3 months, but also to take government to the next financial year when more funds will be available as the new financial year kicks into effect. But there is an agreement with government that we need to have a discussion beyond March. We need to have a solution beyond March for these workers. We couldn't understand why government would simply say to these workers, in an economy with a 41.9% unemployment rate, when most of these workers are women, women who live in rural areas, who live in townships, where there are very few jobs available. And when many of these workers will not qualify for the old age grant, why government would simply say, off you go and good luck? Because for us, that was unacceptable. It was sending them to unemployment, to starvation, to absolute poverty and misery. But we are glad that after our meeting with the minister, that a solution has been found for the short term, and there is an agreement that we need to have further discussion to look at beyond March. But I think when you have an unemployment rate of nearly 42%, government should actually be expanding, ramping up the public employment programs with all of the limitations, with all of the issues, because people are not going to find jobs in this economy. We need to be saying, let's see how to give relief, give solidarity to the poor, to the marginalized, through public employment programs. But I think there also is an agreement with government as well that we need to revamp these public employment programs. We need to make sure they provide the skills, the training, the experience that will help their participants to find work when they exit them, to see how can we use them to provide a safety net for people who can't find work and to provide an employment path for those who can find work. But I think for right now, we're very pleased that government heeded our call as COSATU and the call of our affiliate SAMU to make a plan for these workers and let's have a discussion about the way forward beyond this.
Yeah. Does our economy cater for a society where you have a 55-year-old that still needs to work, 55 years and older? And I believe this is where the cutoff was. It would have been targeted at people 55 years. Previously, there was an attempt to terminate at age 60. But even then, it was impossible to terminate because there are still 60-year-olds who would rely on that kind of a program. So what needs to happen in our economy to be able to cater for that demographic?
Yeah. So look, we've got to deal with multiple crises and multiple interventions simultaneously. You know, the fundamental solution is to grow the economy. To do that, you've got to make sure the state-owned enterprises like Eskom, like Transnet, like Metro Rail, we've got to make sure the municipalities are working to help create an environment for the economy to grow, to reduce unemployment. And that, you know, is going to take place over the medium and the longer term. That's not going to be resolved tomorrow. So whilst we wait for the economy to grow, whilst we wait for jobs, decent jobs to be created, we've got to provide this relief to the poor, to the unemployed. And I think we have to do it. We should not treat public employment programs as some sort of bean counting exercise. It's an investment in our youth, in the unemployed, in the elder, in the vulnerable, and so forth. If you don't provide this relief to people, then South Africa is sitting on a ticking time bomb. We saw the violence erupt during July 2021, and leave aside the criminal and the political orchestration behind it. But it is something we simply can't afford to do. You can't afford to be a society where 4 out of 10 South Africans can't find work. So for us, these are necessary investments, but we do need to revamp the programs to really make sure they actually provide a pathway for people, especially young people, to find jobs at the end of the day. Yeah. But these are necessary interventions in the medium term, as we grow the economy. But I think for us, this gives us some breathing space, but also does help shine a spotlight on a discussion which is already long overdue. We can't continue to be an economy, as you're saying, where 4 out of 10 South Africans can't find work. So that means we really got to put much more effort on the government side to really put more resources, to put more effort, not just national government, but also provincial, municipal government, the state-owned enterprises, the entities, to see what are each of them going to do to help create jobs, help to reduce unemployment. It also means that the private sector too has got to come to the party, because the state will never have enough resources on its own to solve this crisis. And we need to see private sector companies avoiding retrenchments, looking for alternative solutions when they are faced with that crisis, to see how can they bring young people into these companies, and to tap into the CETAs, to hire young people as interns, to expand their artisanship programs as well. But ultimately, this is not just a responsibility of one department of labor, for example, but an entire society, from government to the private sector. We've all got to see how to resolve this issue, because if we don't, it will erupt one day and it will destroy all the progress we made as a society.
Yeah. It seems at the heart of this, of course, are the budget cuts. So how do you have a thoughtful conversation here with Treasury? One, at the level where they are looking at the financial responsibility. You are coming on the other hand about social accountability. How do we find a balance between the two?
You got to basically about 3 or 4 things. One is you've got to grow the economy. So key to that is, for example, the Eskom, the Transnet, the Metro Rail rebuilding and so forth, because those are ultimately the fundamental solutions. Eskom alone adds 1% to GDP. Transnet adds another 1%. If the economy is growing, if businesses can operate, can be productive, that generates the tax revenue the state requires to fund public programs. It means the state also has to be more efficient on how it spends money. It has to deal with the issues of corruption, of wasteful expenditure, of rollovers, etc. So it's got to be a bit brutal to say to certain departments, you don't know how to spend your money. We've seen that time and again, you roll over money. Let's shift it to those who can spend money. But it also means we've got to invest in public employment programs. And yes, they have a huge impact, but actually the amount of money allocated is actually quite small. So the presidential employment stimulus, for example, which was funded by the Unemployment Insurance Fund, cost about 36 billion rand. Yet it managed to enable the state to hire about 600,000 people. So it's a relatively small amount in the broader fiscus of about 2 trillion rand, but the impact upon society, especially the poor, is quite significant. When we do need to cut funds or reprioritize in the state, we appreciate there is a fiscal pressure facing the state. We must do so in a way which doesn't impact upon the poor, upon the vulnerable, the unemployed. If there's a need to cut where there's a non-essential expenditure, cut upon the top where politicians or senior management earn, etc. But we should not do that. But I know you will also ask, so where do we get the revenue from as well? And we think that the critical intervention point there, besides growing the economy and so forth, is actually to give the South African Revenue Service the resources it needs. SARS was part of the state capture project. It was decapacitated. But we've seen in the past few years under the President Ramaphosa's interventions, when competent management was appointed, when critical vacancies were filled, when there was an investment in the infrastructure capacity, the intelligence capacity of SARS, when criminal elements were removed, SARS has managed to generate additional revenue for the state. They managed to increase revenue from 61 to 64%, and each additional 1% the SARS collects in taxes owed to the state, so not new taxes, just existing taxes, is about 20 billion rand. We think we need to simply be having a conversation with SARS to say, get us to a 70% tax compliance rate. That's an additional 120 billion rand over the next 2 years. What resources do you require? And government must simply give them the resources, because SARS, if you give them about 1 billion rand, they are usually able to generate about 10 billion rand in revenue collection. So I think for us, that's a critical issue. But we need to, as we grow the economy, not skimp on relief to the poor, not skimp on stimulus to the economy, and really make sure that the key interventions like the infrastructure program, which government has set aside about 900 billion rand, that those are spent, because those help to unlock the economy. They help to create an environment for businesses to grow, to save jobs, to create jobs. So there's multiple difficult things, but we have to get the basics right. But what we can't do, no matter what, is to send people into unemployment, and we can't afford to scale down on relief to the poor or stimulus to the economy.
Matthew Parks, appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on this afternoon. Matthew Parks, he is the COSATU's parliamentary coordinator.